The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
All right, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for attending the Dibble Institute's second Wednesday webinar titled Friends and Crushes, The Effects of Friends on Romantic Relationships by Dr. Kathleen Hlavaty. My name is Rachel here with the Dibble Institute, and behind the scenes we have the wonderful Kathy who keeps all of this up and running for us.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone.
So before we get into the webinar, I just want to go over some housekeeping items, including the phone number. If we can go to the next slide, please. There we go. Including the phone number and access code to use if you are unable or don't prefer to access the audio for the webinar through your phone. Also, there are going to be several ways to participate in today's webinar. We will have some poll questions during the presentation, and those will show up on your screen. And when they do, you'll just select your response by clicking the bubble next to your chosen item. And there will also be some open-ended questions, or actually there will be one open-ended question that you can respond to down in the chat section of the panel on your right. So I'm just going to give everybody a second to locate that chat panel. And then at the end of the webinar, there will be some time for Q&A with the presenter. So you'll enter any questions into the questions section on the panel to your right. And we do ask that you write down and save any content related questions until closer to the end of the presentation so they don't get mixed up with anyone who may be writing in with any access related issues. And lastly, a few days from now, you'll be able to access the recording of this webinar at our website included on the slide here. And there's also a handout that you can see in the handout box on the panel. And this includes all of the references in today's presentation. And this will also be uploaded in the webinar. So I'll be handing this over in just a moment. But before I do, I'd like to present some background information on the Dibble Institute for any of you who may be listening in for the first time. So this is our founder, Charlie Dibble, and his wife, Helen. Charlie was an engineer by trade, and as such, he sought solutions to issues. So about 30 years ago, he saw how young people's relationships and those of their parents were affecting the outcomes of young people, and not always in a positive way. So he began asking lead experts in the field of education what was being done to help young people develop skills to create stable families, and things just kind of took off from there. So now the Dibble Institute continues his work by advocating for the effectiveness of relationship skill programming for youth and young adults, and publishes research and evidence-based relationship education materials. So like we said, the Dibble Institute is a national nonprofit mission-driven organization, and we're able to reach many young people thanks to the efforts of you and many individuals partnering with us. So we couldn't have reached the 1.5 million young people that we have in the last 15 years without caring people like each of you here today. So I just wanted to say a big thanks to all of you. And now I just want to briefly highlight our core values. So the first is that we believe in research. We rely on current research to keep our materials up to date and relevant, which is why you'll see kind of new releases every now and then. And we also believe in stable, healthy families of all different types. So research continues to show that children really do best when raised with the healthy involvement of two parents, and that their relationship matters whether they're together or apart. So I'd like to point out that this doesn't mean that we are anti-divorce. We understand that not all families have two parents in the household, and research supports that complex, high conflict, and abusive situations aren't good for children. So we support stable and healthy families that include single parents, grandparents, adoptive, step, and extended family who all do great jobs and have great outcomes with their children. And lastly, we also believe that all people deserve respect and that all relationships can be improved with relationship skills. But for the real reason you are all here, you can go to the next slide, I want to take a second to introduce Dr. Kathleen Hlavaty, who is a wonderful scholar and friend of mine. She obtained her doctorate degree in Human Development and Family Studies from Auburn University, where during her time there, she instructed undergraduate courses and served as the project coordinator for the Young Adults Live and Learn project. And currently, she's the project manager and research associate for the Military Families Learning Network in Auburn, Alabama. With that being said, I am excited to introduce my dear friend Kathleen and her webinar presentation, Friends and Crushes, the Effects of Friends on Romantic Relationships.
Thank you for such a very kind introduction, Rachel. I'm blushing. She also knows a lot. Okay, so thank you all for joining me today. I am really excited to explore with you all how friends impact romantic relationships during adolescence. So just quickly, in today's webinar, we will start with a bird's eye view of relationships during adolescence, talk about relationship skills we learn in friendships, discuss the impact that friends have on romantic relationships, and we'll think about how relationship education can impact friendships as well as romantic relationships. I first want to quickly start with a poll question. Now, there's no right or wrong answer here, but I'm curious, why do you think friends are important for relationship educators to consider? Because teens spend more time with friends and family, they play a key role in identity development, because they influence teen relationships, or maybe all of the above? Oh, a very strong opinion here. Yeah, right. I think those are all important reasons why friends should be considered. If we go on to that slide, from a developmental perspective, one of the key developmental tasks that individuals need to complete during adolescence is the development of intimate relationships outside the family. While we often think about romantic relationships in this context, friends are the main out-of-family of origin context in which teens learn the skills needed to build these relationships. Additionally, the skills that are needed to develop and maintain these relationships are gained in friendships first, as friendships are solidifying before romantic relationship involvement typically begins. Therefore, a lot of the relationship skills we start learning in friendships are transferred to romantic relationships. This means that the quality of those skills will impact our romantic relationships. For example, if you learn good communication skills in your friendships, you are more likely to use good communication skills with your romantic partner and have happier, more satisfying romantic relationships. Of course, this can put teens at risk as well. If they're learning or practicing poor relationship skills, then they are more likely to have problems in their romantic relationships. And if we go to the next slide, we'll start addressing some of our learning objectives by getting a good understanding of what friendships look like during adolescence. So I just want to start with a question for all of you. You can take a minute on your own or in the chat box that Rachel pointed out. When you hear the word friend or friendships, what do you think about?
So we have someone who responded in the questions box. Oh,
Perfect.
They're responding in the questions. I just want to let you know. Okay, so we have someone you can rely on, non-familial support, companionship, advice, support system, close trusted connection, chosen family, people you can confide in or rely on, and a trusted companion who I'm close to. So that's some of the responses that came in.
Great. Those are all awesome answers. And a lot of the 6 functions of friendships outlined by Gottman and Parker that we have outlined on this slide are included in some of those responses. And I'm sure some of you that answered that on your own also had some of these as well. And obviously there's one in particular here that's jumping off the slide towards all of us, but I want to go through all of them. First, we have companionship. Someone to do things with. Go to the mall, the movies. We as humans don't really like to be lonely, and it's always nice to have someone that you can go out and do things with. Second, we have stimulation. Essentially, this is having someone to entertain us, right? Someone to have fun with. This is why we enjoy our friends so much. They make us laugh, they make us smile, they make us happy. Physical support is not one that typically jumps to mind, but friends can play an important part in physical development as well. We can think about out on the playground, kids teaching each other new games or how to shoot a basketball better. Or a great example, when your friend gets you to go to that new class at the gym with them. Ego support is particularly important when it comes to friendships during adolescence. Identity development is one of the key developmental tasks during adolescence, and friends help us to build our own identity. and answer questions like what defines you, what's important to you, and not only do friends help us explore these things, but they also help reinforce our chosen identities. Social comparison is always the double-edged sword. On one hand, social comparisons can motivate teens to do better. For example, if you didn't do as well as your friends on an exam, maybe you're motivated to study a little bit more. But we often think about the harm that comes along with social comparison, like unhealthy eating behaviors, risky sexual behaviors, and risky behaviors with drugs and alcohol. And the one that many of you pointed out when responding to the question here is intimacy and affection. The closeness and emotional support we get from friends is really, truly, deeply important to us. And when we ask children and teens to define their friendships, it's often around intimacy that they do so. And if we go on to the next slide, we'll explore the timing of when the importance of intimacy and friendships matters to teenagers by looking at how children and teens answer the same question that I just asked you. Starting with elementary school age children, they don't really describe their friends in terms of intimacy. They describe friends as someone that you share the same interests with, the same things that you do, and they tend to live nearby you so that you usually go to the same school and are easy to play with. And if we go on to the next slide, the friendships we see in children's cartoons like DuckTales and SpongeBob here are great examples of this. In these cartoons, friends are those that you have fun with, share adventures with, have activities with. Friends are all about who you have fun with, not about the emotional aspects of the relationship. Now, that does not mean that this doesn't matter. No one wants to play out on the playground with someone that's mean to them or makes them feel bad. It's just not the main focus of the response when you ask elementary school age children this question. If we go on to the next slide, by middle school, friends are still someone that shares the same interests with you, but now middle schoolers are concerned that their friends share the same values as them as well. We also start to see the emergence of intimacy as an important function of friends. Someone who's loyal to you, or you are to them, but someone who sticks up for you. Now, this isn't quite true intimacy. It's not about the connection that is the most important. So it's more surface level intimacy. But by sticking up for each other and being perceived as loyal to each other, preteens can start to build trust with each other that will lead to true intimacy down the line. Now, on the next slide, an example of what I'm talking about when I here would be the plastics in Mean Girls. And if you've never seen the movie, the group of three girls to the left are called the plastics in the movie. They're a group of three friends that are standing there together. While they appear to be close friends to the other teens in the school, their friendship is really based on being loyal to each other to maintain social power. It's not about this deep personal connection that is founded on trust and emotional support. We go on to the next slide. Can we get the next slide?
Yeah, we're at the next slide. Kathleen, we're there.
Oh, sorry.
I'm sorry.
Looks like
I
my
thought we
computer
lost you
slow.
for a minute. Apologize.
Okay. Finally, by high school, we start to see intimacy as a key feature through which teens describe their friends. Still, sharing the same interests is important, right? Like if you want to go to the football game on Friday night, it's hard to maintain a friendship with somebody who wants to go to the mall on a Friday night. But friends now are defined as someone who understands you, someone who cares about you, that offers emotional support and have intimacy with, right? Like many of you answered in my question. And if we go on to the next slide, to keep the pattern here, just another example of some close friendships from popular culture, right? These are both friend groups where we see friends sharing hopes, dreams, fears, heartbreak with. They offer emotional support and you offer emotional support back. It's a reciprocal relationship built on trust, self-disclosure, and support. These features of friendships continue on into adulthood like these two groups here, right? So this is really what you all were getting at in your responses. It's really about that intimacy and affection. And if we go on to the next slide, now that we have a good overview of friends during adolescence, let's explore how friendships can impact romantic relationships. On the next slide, these are the 5 interpersonal competence skills that researchers have identified as needed for adolescents to have good friendships. But there's also been quite a bit of research linking all 5 of these skills to romantic relationship qualities, both during adolescence and later on during adulthood. And we're going to spend some time going through each of these individually and discuss how they relate to romantic relationships. But I first want to do a couple of polls just to get you thinking about these in a practical sense. So if we bring up that first poll question, which of these skills do you feel like is the most impactful for later romantic relationships? Initiating relationships, self-disclosure, asserting displeasure with others' actions, providing emotional support, or conflict management? Okay, so we're a little bit mixed, but mostly we're looking at conflict management as being really impactful for later romantic relationships. We have a second poll question that is pretty similar. Oop, it's one back from that one.
I'm
So should
sorry,
we,
I just have 3. I was just given 3.
Oh, no. Okay, well, that's fine. If you guys could take a second to think about which of those 5 skills do you feel like teens in relationships struggle with the most? Do you think they tend to struggle with initiating relationships, self-disclosure, asserting displeasure with others, providing emotional support, or conflict management? And I wouldn't be too...
Sorry, Kathleen,
Go ahead,
didn't mean
Rachel.
to interrupt. I was just going to say, I think they're starting to respond in the question box. So I don't know if you just wanted to wait a second.
Sure.
So we see asserting displeasure with others' actions. Conflict management is coming up a lot. Providing emotional support. So it seems like 3 through 5 are kind of the ones that are coming up the most in their responses here.
That makes sense, and that's pretty consistently with how everybody answered on the last poll question too, so that doesn't particularly surprise me. Well, if we want to go on to the next slide then and start exploring each of these skills in detail, we'll start with initiating relationships. So peer relationships teach us how to initiate relationships. Adolescents need to have the social skills to go out and meet new people and initiate conversations. If you can't say hello to that person sitting next to you in class, you can't start building relationships, right? Initiating friendships is a great way to practice initiating romantic relationships. Now that you've mastered saying hello to the person sitting next to you in class, it's easier to go out and initiate a conversation with that cute person across the bar. There's this really great, if you watch it, Big Bang Theory clip in which 2 of the characters, Raj and Stuart, go to the mall to practice talking to strangers so that they feel more confident when they go out and look for a romantic partner. And that's kind of exactly the thing that I'm getting at here. It's about feeling good or confident that you can walk up to someone and initiate a conversation, a relationship. Second here, we have self-disclosure. And this involves sharing personal and private thoughts, feelings, and experiences with others. During adolescence, teens want to start self-disclosing more as a way to develop closer relationships. And importantly, it is often with friends and romantic partners that they self-disclose to. It's not usually adults. Self-disclosure is about creating a careful balance. Not too much too soon as to possibly scare off the person that you're trying to build a relationship with. And refusal to do any self-disclosure stops intimacy from forming. It really does take some time and trial and error to figure out a balance. Like with initiating relationships, teens are directly practicing this skill with friends, and when they feel confident that they know what to disclose, when to disclose, and how to disclose, they are going to be able to do so more effectively as they desire to increase closeness with a potential or a current romantic partner. And if we go on to the next slide, we'll move on to the next two relationship skills here. A really important skill that doesn't get enough attention is asserting displeasure with others' actions. You need to be able to honestly express your opinions and dissatisfaction with others. Along this line, it's important that you're able to create and maintain your own boundaries with others and let them know when you don't like something that they've done. It's hard to develop intimacy in a relationship when you feel bowled over or uncomfortable. Friends offer teens the opportunity to practice asserting themselves in a relationship, and it is both possible and likely that if they can't or don't assert themselves with friends, they won't be able to do this in their romantic relationships. A really interesting article by Allen and colleagues that came out very recently showed that assertiveness during middle adolescence was associated with relationship satisfaction during late adolescence and young adulthood. And this just goes to reinforce the idea that it is an important skill to build happy, healthy relationships. When you aren't able to assert yourself, it doesn't just limit intimacy in a relationship or create feelings of discomfort, but teens can also set themselves up for potentially dangerous power differentials and being pressured into unwanted activities. Of course, in intimate relationships, the ability to provide emotional support is a really important skill. If you go to a friend with a problem and they're not emotionally supportive, it's hard to go back to them for more emotional support. And this ends up limiting the level of intimacy that you can build in a relationship. There's also quite a bit of research that shows that the quality of the relationship or the amount of emotional support that you receive from friends is associated with the quality of romantic relationships during adolescence and young adulthood. And then the inverse is also true. If you report lower levels of emotional support from your friends, you also report low levels of social support from your romantic partners. Now, it is possible that this is just there are some people that are better at providing emotional support, and they're always going to be better at providing it. It doesn't matter what relationship that they're looking at. But it is also possible that in friendships, teens are learning the skills they need to provide better emotional support. This might be through reinforcement. So if a friend starts coming up to you and asking for emotional support through self-disclosure, and you respond in a positive, caring, helpful manner, they're going to keep coming back and telling you more. And because adolescents are so motivated to feel close to their friends, this is going to motivate them to keep having those similar supportive responses. But some of this might also be modeling as well. So if you go to a friend and you self-disclose something and they respond in a way that makes you feel really good, it's possible that you're going to model those similar behaviors and respond to other friends or that friend again in a similar way. And if we go on to the next slide, we'll come to our last relationship skill here, which is conflict management. Conflict is inevitable in relationships, and you need to be able to solve problems in relationships proactively while maintaining intimacy in order to build strong, stable relationships with people. Conflict in friendships can provide the opportunity to improve effective communication or conflict resolution skills. But on the other hand, if we have friends that do not have good conflict management skills, this can foster negativity, unhealthy, or undesirable behaviors. Poor conflict management skills with friends is associated with poor romantic relationship quality, as well as being a very serious risk factor for dating violence. This can be just overall poor conflict management skills, like being pretty hostile towards your friend if you're not happy with something that they've done, but outright bullying is also a significant risk factor. But if we go on to the next slide, we're going to look a little more closely at conflict management skills and how working with friends to build the skills needed to stop unhealthy conflict behaviors in romantic relationships. For those of you that are unaware, being exposed to domestic violence in your family of origin or between your parents is a risk factor for experiencing dating violence in your own relationships. But what some research is starting to show, interestingly, is that high-quality friendships are protective against the use of dating violence for those who've been exposed to domestic violence in their families of origin. So if we're looking at this graph here, I do want to say this graph is simply for illustrative purposes. It is not reflective of any data. It's just that this type of analysis and moderation is not only easier to explain when you have a picture, but it's a little easier to understand when you have a picture as well. So we can see here that those who are exposed to domestic violence in their families of origin, our teal line at the top, report more dating violence than those who are not exposed to domestic violence, our blue line at the bottom. However, for those who are exposed to domestic violence but have high quality friendships, their risk of dating violence looks very similar to those who are not exposed to domestic violence. It is possible that what is driving this decrease in the risk of dating violence is skill building and good relationships. When you have good relationships with friends, you're learning the skills that you need to maintain those relationships, like good conflict management skills, providing emotional support, all the things that we just went over. But I think that this is really great evidence of how if we focus on building these skills early in friendships before adolescents even start going on and initiating romantic relationships, that we can also have a massive impact on the quality of adolescent romantic relationships. But if we go on to the next slide. For the purpose of this webinar, we've been focused on skills that we build in friendships, but that is not the only way that friends impact romantic relationships. First, friends tend to choose, or adolescents tend to choose their romantic partners from their friend group. So if we have a group of friends who are good at conflict management, are high in pro-social behavior, good at providing emotional support, we can feel pretty good about the romantic relationships that come out of that group. However, the inverse is also true. If we have a group of friends that are not good at providing emotional support or have poor or even hostile conflict management skills, we might need to be particularly concerned about the relationships that develop from that friend group. As we've talked about before, friends are a social metric for adolescents. What they see their friends doing in relationships is also what they'll do. And just like I described, as always with social comparisons, this can either be a good thing that we can leverage in relationship education, or this can be a risk factor that we need to be concerned about. Finally, friends are who adolescents turn to the most when they're dealing with romantic relationship concerns or just looking for someone to talk to about their romantic relationships. I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but if we have friends who are encouraging unhealthy relationship behaviors, say for instance, hacking into a romantic partner's Instagram to see who they're talking to, right, we need to be particularly concerned and we'll probably want to intervene in those types of behaviors. Which leads us to the good news is that we can leverage friendships in romantic relationship education. So let's go on to the next slide. So first, I just want to get a sense of some of the programs that you all might be using a poll question.
I think people might have
I'm
responded
sorry.
to this one.
Oh,
Right. I'm sorry. I had already launched it. So what we need to do is a raise your hand question. If you look in your control panel, there is a hand. So you can click beside your name. And do we want to ask first? We'll ask 3 questions. One, if anyone out there uses Relationship Smarts Plus. Then the next one will be, does anyone use Love Notes? And then the last one will be, do you use both of them? So let's ask the first one. How many of you, if you'll raise your hand, use Relationship Smarts Plus out in the field with students? Y'all raise your hand. Okay, looks like a few there. About maybe 5 or 6. Okay. So let's put the hands down. And so how many of you use or have used love notes in working with young people in your field? It's like got a little bit more there. I'd say probably about 15, 20. It's good. And so the last question is, how many use both? You know, a lot of programming, people will use both, one for maybe middle school, one for maybe high school, or a different grants and programming. Okay, it looks like we have about 5 more people. I hope that was helpful to you, Kathleen. Sorry about that.
No, I think that's a great place to start.
All righty.
So as I mentioned earlier, from a developmental perspective, adolescence is a time in which relationships, both friendships and romantic relationships, are beginning to form, and it's therefore an ideal time to implement programs like Relationship Smarts Plus and Love Notes to teach valuable relationship skills. Youth relationship education programs like Love Notes and Relationship Smarts Plus provide adolescents with information and tools for identifying and developing and maintaining their healthy relationships. We see scientific evidence of improvements in a variety of areas because these programs are directly addressing and teaching these skills through fun and interactive lessons. Studies of youth relationship education, specifically Relationship Smarts Plus and Love Notes, find improvements in unhealthy relationship recognition, communication and conflict resolution skills, and general interpersonal competence following program participation. They also find that adolescents are less accepting of violence, and not surprisingly, they report improvements in their peer relationships as well. So these are just a few of the outcomes associated with these programs, and as you've noticed, many of the outcomes I just stated are the skills that we've been discussing during this webinar that are essential in healthy friendship formation. When we go on to the next slide, we'll see that not only does relationship education improve friendship quality, but we can also have friendships helping relationship education. Depending on the age group that you work with, you may sometimes find that you have some students who are struggling with the material because they don't have a romantic partner or have never had a romantic partner. But let's think about the skills that young people are learning and knowledge they're gaining in relationship education programs like Love Notes and Relationship Smarts. These programs cover things like conflict management and communication skills, developing intimacy, handling and responding to peer pressure, and key aspects of healthy relationships, just to name a few. Hopefully these sound familiar because all these map onto the 5 interpersonal competence skills we just went through. This means that the skills they're learning in these programs are transferable. So if they aren't currently in a romantic relationship or maybe haven't had one yet, you can have them focus on applying the material to their friends instead. However, you may need to draw this connection for them, meaning they may come into the program thinking this stuff is only important for romantic relationships. Why do I bother to pay attention? You can show them how these skills they're learning apply to most of their relationships, especially their friendships. When they start practicing and developing their skills through interactions with their peers, which based on the research, we can see in the long run, this will also end up improving their romantic relationships, because building these skills in friendships is linked to having these strong relationship skills as romantic relationships after they enter them. It might be possible that you're having trouble getting an adolescent to buy into the curriculum, so have them focus on it as a way to help their friends. For example, you might have an adolescent that just does not buy that name calling a relationship is really that big of a deal. Ask them if they would ever let someone speak to their best friend that way. We are often far more protective of our friends than we are of ourselves, so you might get some buy-in there. Even if you don't get full buy-in from that adolescent, now you have a teen that is willing and able to give that advice to their friend when they come to them for relationship advice, or maybe self-disclose that their romantic partner is calling them names. And finally, we know Oh, and having friends that are giving advice based on good relationship skills they learn in relationship education might be particularly important for at-risk teens. Mumford and colleagues found that it may be particularly important to intervene in friend groups for adolescent girls that are at high risk of dating violence. Research suggests that young people are at greater risk for being in unhealthy and abusive relationships if they have friends that are also in unhealthy, abusive relationships, or are more accepting of abuse in their relationships, right? Going back to this social comparison idea. Thus, because we know they have a heavy influence on young people during this stage of their lives, having friend groups that do not tolerate dating violence or abuse may be protective for these girls. Again, here we're leveraging friends as advice givers and emotional support givers, and it's important that we give teens the knowledge to be able to give good advice and emotional supports. But of course, when we're done in just a few minutes here, I would love to hear the other ways that you've leveraged friends in relationship education. And if we go on to the next slide, just a couple of big conclusion thoughts here. Friends play an influential role in individual development and the development of romantic relationships. Young people learn many of their romantic relationship skills and behaviors through interactions with their peers and friends, and relationship education can both help grow the skills necessary for success in all types of relationships, and we can leverage friendships as a way to improve romantic relationships later down the line. We go on to the next slide. Thank you all so much for joining me here with this webinar. I would love to hear any questions or ideas that you all have as well.
So yeah, I know we said to everyone to kind of hold off on your questions until the end. So now is the time to ask all your burning questions to Kathleen about peers and their influence on romantic relationships. So I'll give everybody a second for those questions to start coming in. And like Kathleen said, if you've also got some ideas of how you've kind of leveraged or utilized the friend relationships in your work, that's also awesome to share. Oh, can we go back a slide, please? Someone would like to see the conclusion slide again.
Rachel, this is Kathy. This might be a good time too to let everyone know, besides the recording that will be on the website, I'll also be posting a PDF of these slides for you to look at again. And also I will post the handout with the webinar references if you would like to look at that. So you can either print it out now or print it out later.
Yes. So yes, all of this will be made available to everybody in just a few days. But we do have a question coming in. So Kathleen, in general, at what age do you think you can begin to talk about romantic relationships with young people?
Oh, I'm a big proponent of doing it earlier rather than later, right? So, there's some comprehensive sex education programs that start teaching the foundations of consent at kindergarten. So it's not directly, talking about it as a romantic relationship skill or important for romantic relationships, but I do think the foundation of those relationships start early. But I believe that the average age of initiation for romantic relationships is about 14 or 15, so you probably want to start early, early middle school, 11, 12. Start building those good relationship skills early.
Yeah, so it sounds like you're saying, kind of what you emphasized earlier, getting these skill sets and building them earlier in these peer relationships, and how those tie into their relationships. The earlier, the better, right?
Yes, always, right? Isn't that always the case with intervention? The earlier that we start teaching good skills, the better.
Exactly. And then we've got another question. How do you advise a high schooler that there is red flags in their relationship? Do you have any?
Ooh, that's a tricky one. Oh, sorry, Rachel.
No, you're fine. I said I can talk about our wonderful program that has a whole lesson on identifying red flags in relationships, but I can wait and see what you would like to add first.
No, I was just going to say, I think that is a tricky one because you don't, you don't want to push that teenager away, but you want to protect that teenager. So I'm sure Rachel can tell us all about the programming that finds that careful balance between the two.
Yeah, so I don't know, this was from Melissa. I'm not sure if you're familiar with our programs, Melissa, but the programs that Kathleen was referencing earlier, so Relationship Smarts Plus and Love Notes, they both have an entire lesson on identifying red flags, and it's done through a really fun and interactive activity where the young people are presented with a situation and they have to decide. So it's kind of Family Feud style. They're facing off against another, an individual from another team, and they have to decide whether that behavior is a red flag, so a warning sign in a relationship, or a white flag, which is something that they just need some more information on. It's dependent on the context. And then it's followed up by not just, oh, great, yes, it is a red flag, or oh, yes, it is a white flag, but a real thoughtful discussion on what about those behaviors makes it a red flag, or what about that situation would, if it's a white flag, would make it a red flag situation. So having them start to really analyze these relationship behaviors based on the information they've been given so far in the program. So I don't know if that specifically addresses your question, but I hope it does. And if it doesn't, please send me another message and I'll do my best to follow up with you. All right, let's see. Oh, I heard the sound has been cutting out. Can you hear me, Kathleen and Kathy?
Yes, I can.
Okay.
Yes, I can. Yes.
Okay, so I'm not sure what's going on there.
Their web server.
Yeah. All right, and then, oh, we've got lots of questions coming in now. So what developmental differences do you need to keep in mind when teaching romantic relationship skills between tweens and older young adults?
Oh, so I think that the difference here is that, tweens don't take it as seriously because they're still kind of in that, like, it's far away. They're having crushes. They have, the you're my girlfriend or boyfriend because you sit near me in class type of relationships. So, and I think they're, in the throes of puberty, embarrassed by everything. So you think keeping it a little bit lighter, but with, older teenagers, it is really, really important to them, their romantic relationships. They're really motivated to have good, strong romantic relationships, have that Disney love. So I think your approach to, understanding where they're at developmentally with how important romantic relationships are to them is the difference between the two.
So what I hear you saying is kind of understanding that shift between the friendships into really kind of the benefits and the importance of romantic relationships at those different stages.
Yes.
Awesome. All right. And then Lorraine asked, how do you encourage friends to understand that although they think they can clearly see that a relationship that a friend is in is a poor relationship, that the friend has so much, that the friend has so much more in stake in that relationship and that it's not always so black and white?
So there's some really interesting research in this area that's been going on, and a lot of times adolescents it's been a lot of qualitative research saying that they feel really stuck because they feel like if they go and tell an adult or tell their friend that this isn't a good relationship, then the friend will be mad at them or abandon them or not talk to them. But a lot of the researchers are finding that adolescents really actually appreciate relationship education and learning and hearing that these types of things are important and getting the skills that you learn in these programs to tell your friend when there's a red flag. I think the game that Rachel described is a really great way to build the skill of, hey, here's what the red flag is and here's why. But some of it is, adolescents do need trusted adults that they can go to and tell when there is a real problem. So building those types of safe spaces are also really important.
Awesome. Okay, let's see. Sorry, kind of scrolling down the list to try and get them in order. But we've got one person who would like to know if you're familiar or have heard of the curriculum, How to Avoid Falling for a Jerk or a Jerkette.
Ooh, no, I have not, but that is a great title. That is very catchy for adolescents.
So there we go. And then let's see. We have another one saying, and we'll see what your thoughts are on this, Kathleen. How can you convince parents and school boards that this information is important? Or how can you respond to backlash of parents not wanting tweens to learn about relationships?
Yeah, I have to say, I don't quite understand why there's so much backlash to this. You know, if it's the romantic relationships that people are struggling with, I say just shift it towards we're teaching people how to be good friends. Because, like we've seen through this whole webinar, if you build the skills in friendships, they're going to have the skills for romantic relationships. But I always come from the approach of we have lots of evidence in research. Sure, Rachel can give you a stack higher than the two of us combined about why relationship education is so important and why it's so important to start early on. And yeah, I never understood why people backlash against it. So it's hard for me to answer that, but I think that's a simple shift that we can reasonably do is if there is backlash or if you have a school board that doesn't want to teach tweens about romantic relationships, call it a friendship program.
Yeah, that's a great idea, a different spin on it. And I think part of it is too, by introducing schools to the program, right? So a lot of the times, like some people kind of tend to have a response of like, maybe I don't want somebody else teaching my kid about relationships because, sometimes we all think that we are the ones who know best about certain things, right? So letting the school board kind of see the program with our programs, especially, I know that we don't typically hear about parent pushback, especially with the fact that we engage them through trusted adult teen connection activities throughout the program. So they're kind of involved in this process as well. But also, if you would like, I think that was Megan was where the question came from. We also have an infographic on the Dibble Institute website that goes over some of the statistics and this information that Kathleen was referencing about the impact of teen relationships on young people's lives. And also on the other side is the benefits of relationship education and how this is directly addressing some of those kind of bigger and potentially more problematic areas. So if that's something that you're interested in, we've got a survey at the end. You can just kind of notify me there and I'll make sure to get you a copy of that infographic or at least direct you to that link if that's something you would like.
Rachel, I think, wasn't there a webinar we did maybe a month or so ago with Flip and Brian that also talked about how they get into the schools?
Yep.
So that might be a good place for them to start as well.
Yeah, that was a great point. So yeah, if you find our April webinar, I want to say, it's tips for teaching HMRE. And like Kathy said, part of it, they give some great advice on how to get into the schools. So that's another option for you. Let's see. And then we have, are there any differences in romantic relationships and friendships in same-sex couples? Kathleen, I don't know if you.
No. In younger adults and adults, we see that there's less hostility in the startup of conflict for LGBTQ relationships, but there really aren't any differences between friendships and romantic relationships for those who are heterosexual and identify as LGBTQ+. Although I say that a lot of times as well for LGBTQ plus adolescents, they tend to start relationship involvement just a little bit later, but that's due to a lot of the discrimination that they faced in history. So we might see that change a little bit now that as a society, we are more accepting of those identities.
Awesome. And then we've got another question. Would you encourage people in the field of dating violence prevention to adopt comprehensive relationship education as a strategy? And do you have any examples of DV providers doing relationship education?
So I don't know of any specific DV shelters that do that, but we have great people like Rachel who does that. It looks specifically at the impact that relationship education has on decreases in dating violence. So we do know, and there's quite a bit of research that shows that relationship education reduces dating violence and acceptance of dating violence. So we have that research, but it's places like Dibble here. I don't think it's like domestic violence shelters that are doing it.
Yeah, actually, we have. If you'd like to put a note in the survey, who's ever asked that question, Rachel and I can get back with you. We do have domestic violence shelters and programming that are using love notes. So we
Well,
can
there
get
you
that
go.
for you. Excellent. Yeah.
Yeah, and like Kathleen was saying, though dating violence prevention specific programs have their strengths, we see some kind of broader benefits with this incorporation of not just identifying what an unhealthy relationship behavior is. So not just saying, oh, I know this is unhealthy, but also being taught kind of what to do and learning what to do and how to make things, better and to choose a different path. And also learning about yourself and maybe why you fall into these patterns of unhealthy behaviors in your relationships and things like that. So we know that there are a lot of benefits to comprehensive relationship education versus just DV prevention specific programs. All right. Any other questions? I think I've got everyone's specific questions that I see that have come in. Let me just check the chat box just in case. Yeah, I don't have anything in there, so. Yep, I think that may be it. So if we just want to go to the last few slides, I just wanted to thank Kathleen for putting on this wonderful webinar about the effects of friends on romantic relationships, especially with the importance of peers during this time. And for all of you for joining us today on our second Wednesday webinar. So like I mentioned, there is a brief survey at the end of this webinar. We really encourage you to please fill that out. Let us know if there's something that you are interested in and want more information about, and we will get back to you as soon as possible. And like I said, this webinar will be available in the next couple of days on our webinar archives link listed there, and we'll also include the handouts which list all the references that were included in Kathleen's presentation today. Or if you have any other specific questions or you just kind of want more information about our programs, you can always email Kathy at Kathy@dibblinstitute.org or myself at Rachel@dibblinstitute.org. But we hope that you stay in touch. There are a lot of different ways that you can stay connected to the Dibble Institute in between our webinars. So you can check out our website, subscribe to our newsletter, check us out on Facebook, follow us on LinkedIn, or always call and ask any questions that you may have for us. But we also hope that you come to our next webinar for June. So that'll be June 12th, and it's entitled, What Do You Mean? Unblurring the Lines Between Consent, Assault, and So Much More. So that will be next month, June 12th at the same time, 4 o'clock Eastern. So we hope to see everybody there and want to say thank you again to everybody who showed up today and for Kathleen for putting on such a wonderful presentation for all of us.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
You have a good evening.
Bye, everybody.